have to start is with our products and our services.
Not with our marketing.
I feel my job is to help the team at Apple do the right things to turn this company around.
And we got a really great team here at Apple.
Everybody who's worked on iPhone and made those sacrifices is going to feel that it's been worth it.
What was it like to meet Steve Jobs?
I don't know, how much time do we have? I have never seen a more magnetic personality. I mean, he really was everything that they say. I actually created the genesis of what today is the Worldwide Developers Conference. So within 5 minutes, I'm talking to Michael Jackson's business manager, and Michael Jackson gets on the phone. What was most important was the end result, not the individual.
Mark Achler is a managing director at Math Venture Partners in Chicago. He's a serial entrepreneur. And if you go on his LinkedIn profile and scroll far enough down, then you'll see that in 1983, he was an introduction manager for Apple. And that is when he met and worked with young Steve Jobs. Mark, well, thank you so much for being on the podcast. Really, really appreciate you and excited to hear some of the stories.
Well, Sergey, thanks again. It's so much fun to do this with you. Thanks.
I totally appreciate it. Now, you have been an Apple introduction manager, whatever that title meant, in 1983 and 1984. What was it like?
Oh my God, it was so much fun. We were the young, arrogant snots that were taking over the world. We were changing everything. It was great. It was really to be at the very beginning of an industry and to, to work with Steve Jobs and Woz and just to really fundamentally do something new. And what was really interesting, I was 24 years old and 25, and I was working there, and they had so much responsibility at a young age, and it was really trial by fire.
How many people, Mark? How many people do you remember roughly? What was the team like in 83?
Well, at the time, I don't know what they do today, but employee badges were sequential. Number one, number two. Yeah. And I was employing, my badge number was 612, I think it was. And so there weren't 600 people in the company at the time because obviously people come and go and they leave. So it was a fairly small company when I was there. It was just at the beginning days.
Right. And you were, from what I could gather, you were introducing Apple to the dealers.
That's correct. So I actually came from the dealers. My father and I started a computer retail store in 1981. We were one of the very first.
Wow. Apple
and then IBM when the original IBM PC came out. And so I sort of grew up on the streets. I understood the dealer network, and I was brought in to introduce a new computer, the Apple IIc, to the dealers.
Right. That's quite amazing. And 24, and at that time, but it wasn't. Do you think it was obvious that personal computing is the thing, and there's a 100% where the industry is going, or It wasn't that clear?
No, it wasn't clear at all. In fact, most people did not have computers in their homes. These was the early days. When you said in 1983, when you said computer, people thought IBM, mainframes, or digital, but personal computers, that was very, very few people had personal computers back in the day.
Right. What was it like to meet Steve Jobs?
Well, I don't know. How much time do we have?
Oh, we have plenty.
No, I'm joking. Steve Jobs, this for me, this is in 1983. So this was very early, but I have never seen a more magnetic personality. Somebody almost Svengoolie, like, somebody who just drew you in. and it was so incredibly inspirational. I was just in awe of him and his talent. I mean, he really was everything that they say, and as a once in a generation, but just a unbelievably great salesperson.
Oh yeah. When did you get to meet him first?
Well, so this is a longer story. When I was brought in to introduce the Apple IIc before, in the history of the company had only been around for maybe 5 years, 6 years. And what we did previous is when there was a new computer, we went city to city to city, and we did like a 26 city road show. And we went and showed the dealers in every city the new computer, whatever it was.
Yeah.
An Apple III or a Lisa back in the day. And I said, well, that's silly. Why do it 26 times? Why not just do it once? Why don't we bring all the dealers together in one location and do a bigger event and just do it one time? And I had to go in front of Steve Jobs and the board of directors to get this approved, because this was a fundamentally different way of rolling out the computer. And so that's the first time I met Steve Jobs.
And so what was it like? He was way crazier back then when after he came in 97.
Well, so we'll talk about that in a second. So I had to go in front of the board and pitch this idea. And at the end, so this is the fall of 1983, and Michael Jackson had just released Thriller, his big album.
Right. Yep.
And so I pitched the idea to Steve and to the board, and they say, yeah, they like it. Great idea. Let's do it. Let's have one event. And by the way, that event became so successful, it was called Apple II Forever. That was the name of the event. That the next year, they turned it into Macworld. And so Macworld, right? Wow. Remember Macworld? And then Macworld eventually became the Worldwide Developers Conference, which is next week.
Yeah, exactly.
And so I say that tongue in cheek, but I actually created the genesis of what today is the Worldwide Developers Conference. So I go to, so Steve and the board say, yes, let's do it. And Steve turns to me and he goes, well, we've got to have entertainment. He goes, Mark, go call Michael Jackson. Well, it's 1983. There's no internet. And he literally meant for me to get up out of my seat and go call Michael Jackson. So I went, okay. So I leave the boardroom. I find an open cubicle with a phone, and I call directory assistants. So when we used to have directory assistants, and I called Los Angeles and I said to the operator, I know you can't tell me, but this is who I am. I work for Apple. I'm trying to figure out how to get to Michael Jackson. If you were me, what would you do? And she goes, no problem. I've got this. She goes, here's how we do it in Los Angeles. He records under this label. You call the label and you ask for his business manager. And that's how you get him. Like, okay.
That's a great question.
Right. So within 5 minutes, I'm talking to Michael Jackson's business manager, and Michael Jackson gets on the phone.
Wow.
So this is 1983. Guess how much money he wanted. So the typical, like the A+, like the best talent for like a 1 hour or an hour and a half corporate show charged $50,000 back in 1983.
Which is a lot, which is still a ton.
Still a ton, right? But I'm talking about like the A list.
Right.
So guess how much money Michael Jackson wanted?
I would probably go with 200,000.
He wanted $5 million back in 1983 for a 1 hour corporate show.
Wow.
So I go back into the board of directors room, and the board stops, and Steve Jobs stops, and he goes, what are you doing? Like, why are you here? I said, well, you told me to call Michael Jackson. I just got off the phone with him. So everybody stops. I tell them what he said. They all burst into laughter. And of course, they didn't do it. They didn't pay $5 million for a 1-hour show. But that's not the cool part of the story. So there's a very famous ad, the 1984 Macintosh ad, which was the first mega Super Bowl ad.
Exactly.
It was the ad that changed everything. It was the first time a movie director, Ridley Scott, directed an ad. The production costs were over $1 million. It was nothing like the television commercial world had never seen anything like it. And Steve Jobs was just about to show this ad to introduce the Macintosh to the world for the first time to the board of directors. And Steve said, "Hey, do you want to sit down and watch?" I'm like, yeah, of course. So the lights go down. Now the board at the time were all old white guys, all guys in their 50s and 60s. And, and the lights go down, the ad comes up, and I am blown away. Like, this is the coolest thing I have ever seen in my life. And the lights go back on, and the board of directors, they're all sitting with their arms crossed, their faces pinched, they're really pissed. And they say to Steve Jobs, "No way, no how," because the ad was really poking fun at IBM. The ad was Big Brother, IBM is Big Brother, and like, don't tweak the nose of the giant, like don't poke him in the eye. And the board said, "We forbid you from ever showing that ad." And Steve Jobs doesn't miss a beat. And he looks the board in the eye and he says, "Well, okay, but I have to tell you that I already booked the Super Bowl, and the Super Bowl ad was $1.5 million, the slot, and it was non-refundable." So the board said, "Okay, fine. You can show that ad one time." And that they did. He only showed it one time. And it became not only an iconic ad, it's like one of the most famous ads ever, and the first real Super Bowl ad, but it also was famous for only being shown one time. They thought it was marketing genius. And I tell that story to the CEOs. As a venture capitalist, I sit on a lot of boards, I mentor a lot of CEOs. And I tell that story to the CEOs because I say to them, look, you can't fight with your board a lot. You have to pick your battles. But we invested in you because you know your business better than we know. Like, you live it day to day. And when you know something deep in your gut, when you're right and the board is wrong, you also have to have you have to have the spine. You have to have the conviction to stand behind your beliefs. And you can't do it a lot, but every once in a while, you got to stand up to your board for what you absolutely, positively know is the right thing to do. So that was the first time I met Steve Jobs.
Wow, what an incredible story! It absolutely is. And who could do it any better than Steve, by already doing something behind the scenes and put in all the guys on the spot. It's so not surprising.
It was amazing. It was really interesting. But I'll tell you the downside of Steve Jobs. So I had a chance over the course of a couple of years to interact with him on many occasions. And, I was fortunate enough to be a CEO 4 different times. And as a CEO, when I asked one of my employees to do some extra work, to, put in some extra effort.
Right.
And they worked nights and weekends. They really put in the work. And on an arbitrary scale of 0 to 10, where 10 was the best and 0 was the worst, if one of my employees who worked extra hard turned in a project that, let's call it an 8 or a 9, I said, thank you. As a CEO, I just wow, thanks. Appreciate all the hard work and effort. Way to go.
Right.
And I saw Steve Jobs time and time again like get into somebody's face. We, as human beings, we have a certain comfort level of space between us. I literally saw him like just get into people's physical space, like right in their face, and yell and scream and sometimes spit coming out of his mouth. And just like, I can't believe you gave me this garbage. Like, you had the audacity to just give me this pile of shit. And what I saw happen was I saw people have nervous breakdowns, quit, get divorced, have drinking problems or substance abuse problems. Some people, not everybody, of course, most people were fine, but some people, he was incredibly hard on them. And what happened is, on that arbitrary scale of 0 to 10, what I saw him do is get people to create an 11, like create a level of excellence they didn't even know they had in them, like just over and above. And to Steve at the time, and I'm sure he mellowed a bit as he got older, what was most important was the end result, not the individual. And, and that's why he was Steve Jobs. And, I had success in my career, but to me, the individual, I would never break down a human being to achieve an end result. And to him, at least at the time, the end result mattered. Right. And he had impeccable taste. Like he sweated the details, and he it had to be perfect.
Do you think that, how was he able to pull that off, in a sense that this is widely being described and documented by how he treated people like shit in so many ways? And you gave one of the examples, yet a lot of people still stayed.
Sure, most. Yeah, well, one, he was incredibly magnetic, and I remember I was in the audience the day the Macintosh launched, and I remember like the hairs on my arms were like standing, like it was electric. I had never been like, I would have done anything. Like he got that crowd just like screaming at the top of our lungs, and he had a vision. Not only was he a master salesperson, like he had a vision that was just extraordinary. And back in my days, we could talk about post 1997 when he came back, where, no CEO in the history of the planet created as much value. Apple was at death's door, that only survived because of a loan from Microsoft. And he took that shell of a company and, just turned it into what it is today, right? Like his vision was singular. But even back in the day, for my product, for example, the Apple IIc, up until then, the packaging, the box was brown cardboard.
Right.
And he said, well, let's create bright red packaging and put a picture of a family, and we'll make the box part of the purchase, part of the POP. And like who thought it? Like nobody had ever thought of that before him. Like right. It's little things like that today.
But it was also, there was this other side in a way of this approach, which I think for Steve, he tuned it down a bit. When he was at Next, he famously bought this factory, and he wanted this expensive machinery being painted. And it was all beautiful, except there was nothing to manufacture. So there was these other extremes that were like way too extreme of investing into manufacturing, and where you're not really actually are selling enough products. Do you think that changed enough when he came back to Apple a second time?
Yes. One of the things that he was incredibly famous for is his design aesthetic. And one of the parts of that design aesthetic was simplicity. And he loved very simple user experiences, very clean. For example, when he came back in 1997, there were 21 Macintosh SKUs. He turned them 21 to 3.
Right.
He was just like we're gonna clean up this line. We're gonna clean up. Like I think he had more. And I wasn't there at the time, so this is me reading the books just like you are.
Right.
But I think he had more business wisdom and audacity at the same time. And I think that combination of and a dash of humility. It's hard to use Steve Jobs and humility in the same sentence.
Right.
But I think the next experience, the first time he got fired from Apple, I think not only did he have a chip on his shoulder where he had something to prove, but it was an incredibly potent mixture of that chip on the shoulder with a dash of humility and a whole lot of earned wisdom.
That is what I've heard. That's what I've heard too. There was one biography written that purely explored Steve's approach of how he changed his approach to business, and dealing with people was a part of it. And the next stint was really fundamental in the way that he wasn't as quote unquote crazy as in your days.
Well, yeah, and I'll take simplicity a couple steps further. So take the original iPods. So may it rest in peace. I think this week or last week I saw the notice that right, the iPod is no more. What was genius about the iPod? There were MP3 players before the iPod. There were lots of them. But it was really hard to get the music from whatever the source was into the player. Part of the genius of the iPod was the simplicity from the source of the music into the iPod and how you accessed it. It was so easy to do. And I think people lose track. The iPod wasn't the most powerful. It didn't have the most memory. It didn't have the most features. It just was the easiest to use. And the design aesthetic, it was really simple.
Yeah, it was the sexiest product probably ever easily ever in those early 2000s, even though it was introduced right after 9/11, which was not the best time, but still.
Yeah, but people forget the genius wasn't, there were MP3 players before that. The genius, it wasn't the tech. It was how, just the end to end, how people used it. That was the genius.
Absolutely. Steve brought John Scully in 1983.
Yeah, I was there.
You were there. What was going on at that time?
Well, I was there the day John Scully was introduced to the company. I remember it clearly. It was in the Apple III building, the Triangle building, and I was on the second floor looking down, and Steve Jobs was so excited. And we were all excited because, it was kind of the Wild West. We were the kids, and, John Scully represented the professionals, the adults, like the real managers. Like for us at the time, it felt like, okay, like this is real. We're going to grow and scale this thing. And now we've got some professional managers in there to help us do that. So we really, the company, at least my perception at the time, was we really embraced John.
Right. I want to ask a few last questions. Mark, is there a visionary right now at Apple, in your opinion?
I'm not close enough to the company to give you an answer. I don't know the answer to that.
What do you think about Apple products at the moment? As if we look at 2010 effectively, this is where Steve, 2010, 2011, this is where Steve actually worked on the pipeline of products at that time. And then from 2011 until now, what's your opinion and your understanding of where Apple is going?
Well, I think Apple's done a phenomenal job on broadening services. So if you look at iCloud and Apple TV and all the different subscription services that they offer and iBooks and I think they've done a very good job of surrounding their hardware with appropriate services and content. And I think the hardware has evolved, have been evolutionary, not revolutionary. And so, I think we're all kind of just waiting a little bit. There was rumors of a Apple VR headset for sure, a car, the Apple car. I'm really curious. And when you're the world's most valuable company or close to the world's most valuable company, one of the challenges is it's harder and harder to risk. It's harder and harder to take risk. And that's not Apple. That's any large company. Just the dynamics of being a large company is your shareholders expect predictability of revenue. Your shareholders, your job is to protect what you have. And it's much harder to innovate inside of a behemoth. And so I think they've done an outstanding job of evolution. And I'm curious to see where the next revolution comes.
Certainly, there's a lot of people who think that Apple is sitting on too much of cash, but it's also the investors and the return and that dynamics of a large company and the risks that we should take into account.
Yeah. Although I don't feel sorry for them. I think Apple has more money than most countries.
That exactly, probably more than a couple.
For sure.
Mark, is there anything I haven't asked you in this Apple Steve Jobs conversation that I should have, or anything you'd like to add?
No, the only thing I would add is how grateful I am to have those memories, to learn from Steve, and I learned a ton from him. And I'm no matter the issues around him, I'm a gigantic fan and grateful that I had the time that I spent with him and learn and be inspired by him.
Mark, thank you so much. Thank you for coming and sharing these tremendous stories. I do hope that our audience enjoys it as much as I did and you went well experiencing it.
Well, Sergey, thanks. I'm always glad to talk with you and always give back and help if I can.
Thank you so much. Thank you guys for watching. I hope you enjoyed this story. Would you like me to do stories similar to these or cover other CEOs? Please leave it down in the comments. I'm developing this channel around technology. Would love to hear your opinion. What should I do next? Consider subscribing for similar content because I'll be coming up with 2 pieces of content every week. And of course, I'll see you as always in the next one.